Hello, welcome to week 14 here of English 112 at Delta College. It's going to be a really short lesson this week because all we're talking about is revising and editing. And when it comes to revising and editing, there's only so much that you can talk about. So there's not a whole lot that's new here. We're mostly going to be reviewing, especially in terms of editing. But we'll talk a little bit about revising paragraphs this week. Let's get started. So, paragraphs, the best definition of what a paragraph is that I've come across comes from the poet and creative writer Sherman Alexie. And he wrote this in an essay, The Joy of Reading and Writing, Superman and Me, in which he talks about his literacy narrative and how he came to learn how to read and write. And it was through reading Superman comic books. So he writes, I can remember picking up my father's books before I could read. The words themselves were mostly foreign, but I still remember the exact moment when I first understood with a sudden clarity the purpose of a paragraph. I didn't have the vocabulary to say paragraph, but I realized that a paragraph was a fence that held words. The words inside a paragraph worked together for a common purpose. They had some specific reason for being inside the same fence. So, like I said, that's really the best definition for a paragraph that I've come across. A paragraph is a fence that holds words, and the words relate to each other in some way. There's some sort of common idea that they express, and that's why they are fenced in within the paragraph itself. Now, Alexi goes on to talk about how once he had this revelation of what a paragraph is, he started to see other things in terms of paragraphs and sort of written structure. So he compares his family to an essay, and each member of his family is a paragraph within that essay. One person or one idea that contributes to the overall whole. And that's really what a paragraph does. It is one idea expressed and explored in a way that contributes to the overall whole of the overall work. So paragraphs, if you want to get sort of pedantic and grammatical with it, paragraphs are groups of sentences related to the same topic. And there should be one topic per paragraph. And the topic sentence is the first sentence of the paragraph. So the first sentence of the paragraph tells you what that paragraph is about, what topic it's going to explore. And then each sentence within that paragraph explores or elaborates on that idea, on that topic. So that's what a paragraph is. Now, when you get into the body of your essay, you can organize the paragraphs in different ways. As I've talked about before with introductions and conclusions don't have to be limited to a single paragraph. They could be multiple paragraphs. And when you get into more advanced writing and upper level division courses, you find that one paragraphs don't really work. That's not enough to get the job done. So just as with the introduction and the conclusion, don't think in terms of paragraphs with the body of the essay, but think in terms of sections. And so the body section of your essay is going to be comprised of multiple paragraphs, and you can organize them in different ways depending on how you want your reader to get the ideas. So you can arrange them by audience. What is going to be significant or of interest to your audience? The most interesting things should probably come first, and the less interesting things should come later. So if you look at the way that magazine articles or newspaper articles are arranged, they tend to be arranged paragraphically, structurally by audience interest. So the most pertinent information goes first or early in the article, and the less interesting stuff goes later on. And the reason for that is that most people don't read entire articles, or at least when it comes to magazines and newspapers. They read to get quick hits of information. So the first paragraph or the lead paragraph tells them who, what, where, when, why, and how. It answers those reporters' questions. And then the following paragraphs elaborate on them. And then if the reader is more interested in the topic, they can continue to finish the entire article. But when you look again at those magazine and newspaper articles, they're written in a way that doesn't expect the reader to read the entire article. And so they give you the most interesting or most pertinent information up front. So you can organize your essay that way by audience interest. You can organize it by importance of the information. So you can do it in ascending or descending order. So if you want to begin with your most important information up front and less important information later on, you can do that. And when it comes to essay exam writing, that's the best way to do it because you have that timed situation. And so you want to get the important ideas out first in case you run out of time. So in the case of an essay exam, it's best to arrange your paragraphs in order of greatest importance to least importance. And for a regular out of class essay, you would typically want to reverse that order and go from least important information to the most important information and build up to those ideas. You can arrange your paragraphs chronologically by time sequence. So first this happens, and then this happens, and then this later thing happens. So you can go through it chronologically. And that works best if you're writing a process analysis or a process essay in which you explain how to do something. So first you began with this, then you move to this other thing, and then finally in this other way. So organizing your paragraphs by time sequence are best for those situations. And then rhetorically, you want to arrange your paragraphs by emphasis. Typically, the later paragraphs in an argumentative essay are those which take more emphasis. So you can move your more important points to later on, or the points that you want to emphasize to later on in your essay, because those are the points where they're the most recent for the reader, so they end up being more memorable. So if you want to organize your ideas in ways that you want to emphasize certain ideas, then you can put those that take the emphasis to later in your essay. But there are multiple ways that you can organize your paragraphs. It depends on what your purpose is and who your audience is. So you always have to keep your purpose in mind, whether it's to inform or to persuade. And you always need to keep your audience in mind. What is going to be most interesting or effective for your audience? Let that determine the paragraph order. And so editing then, like I said, there's really nothing new to talk about in terms of editing or grammar here. So we're just going to do a quick, very quick review of what we had talked about before. And the editing lessons in here, as I've said before, are arranged in a way that we went from the smallest unit of meaning in writing, which is the punctuation, and we built up to the sort of longer unit of meaning, which is the sentence. So punctuation to words to sentences. Smallest unit of meaning to largest unit of meaning. And we built on what came before. And in the past, as I've talked about, whenever we've covered one of these issues, you became responsible for that issue. So for that first essay, we talked about how to use punctuation correctly and effectively. And so you were responsible for doing that in that first essay, and that was considered as part of the grade. And now, since we're at the end of the semester working on the final essay, you are responsible for using punctuation, words, and sentences correctly and effectively. So your writing from this point on should be effective and grammatically correct because you are being held responsible for that, and it is going to factor into your grade. So punctuation, we talked about punctuation falling into two categories, which are grammatical and rhetorical. The difference being that grammatical punctuation are those marks that can only be used in one way. And that's because the usage is determined by grammatical rule. So there are correct and incorrect ways of using those marks. Rhetorical punctuation can be used in more than one way because the usage is determined by rhetorical effect. So there isn't a correct or incorrect way of using those marks. There's just least effective and most effective ways of using those marks. In terms of words, there are three basic types of word errors, which are homonymic. These are words where people get confused based on the ways, primarily the words sound. So you're dealing with homophones. Grammatical errors are those where people just use the wrong word because they don't understand the meaning of the word. And then you have simple spelling errors where people just spell the word wrong. And then finally, we talked about sentences, and the most common sentence problems or issues that people have are those which are fragments, fused sentences, which includes comma splices, faulty parallelism, and passive voice. So a fragment is an incomplete sentence. A fused sentence or comma splice is when you have multiple sentences that have been combined improperly. Faulty parallelism is where the sentence structure shifts from clause to clause or sentence to sentence. And then passive voice is where you are focusing on the objects of the sentence as opposed to the subjects. And as I've said before, passive voice isn't technically wrong because it is grammatically correct. And there are certain subjects that require the use of passive voice. But generally speaking, active voice is better because it's more energetic, more dynamic, and more clear and concise. And so in the humanities, which includes English, we use active voice. So it's best to use active voice. And I'm posting an article on e-learning here that needs to be edited. I'm just going to post this for your own practice so you can practice editing. So this article has each of the issues and errors that we've talked about in terms of punctuation, words, and sentences. And for you to practice looking for those and editing for those, you can go ahead and use this article. I'm not going to collect it, although if you do want to submit it to me and get some feedback, you're more than welcome to do so. Okay, and then finally, like I said, really short lesson this week because we're coming down to the end. There's not a whole lot left to talk about. Finally, the first draft of your proposal is due at the end of this week. Okay, so that's really it for this week. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to email me and I will respond as soon as I can. Next week will be the final lesson. We're going to talk about citations and different citation formats. And the week after is the final week. So that's when everything is done and needs to be submitted for the final grade. So I will talk to you again next week. I hope you have fun. It's probably inaccurate to say that, but try to have fun doing the editing for your first draft, and then I will talk to you again next week. Okay, take it easy and take care.